Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Nun Beis Amud Aleph, starting with Daf Nun Aleph Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. At the time that they would mikadesh the chodesh, so they would send out shluchim to tell people when indeed the chodesh was niskadesh. So thereby they would know when is Yom Tovim. Some places that did not get the shluchim, did not arrive to these places, then misafek, they kept 2 days for Yom Tovim. The Gemara now discusses a situation where a person who was from a place where they did have shluchim that come to him, so he knows bevadois when the chodesh was niskadesh, and therefore when is Yom Tiv, and he then goes to a place where they did not yet get, they never got shluchim, whereby they're mistapik and they keep 2 days Yom Tiv. Says the Gemara, what's the din? Omar le Rav Safra le Rabbi Abo kigoin anon diadinam bekviyah diyarcha. Like us, we do know the kviyah diyarcha. In other words, that the shluchim came to us. What happens when we go to a place where shluchim did not arrive to? On top of Nun Beis Amud Aleph, b'yishuv loy avidna mivnei shinui machlokes. When we get to the yishuv of one of these places that the shluchim did not arrive, and now it's Yom Tov Sheni, so we cannot do malacha in their yishuv. Why? Because that one ma'ore machlokes. Tosfos says even malacha betzina is problematic, and therefore we have to desist from doing malacha altogether. However, b'midbar mai, when you're outside the yishuv, 2,000 almost outside the yishuv, what is the din? Can you do malacha on Yom Tov Sheni or not? Omar lei. Hochi Omar Rabbi Ami. This is what Rabbi Ami said. B'yishuv oser, b'midbar muter. In the yishuv itself, it would be oser, as we said before. However, if it's in the midbar, meaning outside, again, the yishuv, 2,000 amos outside the yishuv, and you never went into the yishuv, then you can do malacha in the midbar. Rav Nosson bar Asya ozel b'bei Rav lepumbetiso. Rav Nosson bar Asya, he traveled from Eretz Yisrael, where they kept 1 day, and he went to Pumbedisa in Bovel, where it was now Yom Tov Sheni. So it says, Yom Tov Sheni Shel Atzeres, the 2nd day of Shavuos. Shamte Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef flogged him. Omar le Abaye. Abaye says to Rav Yosef, Shamte Rav Yosef, I want to correct what I said. Shamte Rav Yosef means Rav Yosef put him in excommunication. Omar le Abaye. On that, Abaye says to Rav Yosef, V'lenagde mar negide. Why didn't you flog him? Omar le adifa avdile. I did something that was more chamor, more preferential, a better type of oynish that was more chamor, more stringent. The ma'arova b'mimnu anigdide the be'arav. That in Eretz Yisrael they voted to give flogging, to give lashes to those students that were in the from the Beis HaMedrash who deserved punishment. In other words, they went against the Divrei Chachamim. V'lo mimnu as ashamta, but they did not vote to give them excommunication, to give them excommunication. So therefore, I gave the more severe punishment, since Yom Tov Sheni is such a severe thing to be transgressing. Ika da Amre, the Gemara brings another version. Nagde Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef gave lashes to Rav Nosson bar Asya, who went from Eretz Yisrael and did malacha in Pumbedisa and Bovel on Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios. Omar le Abaye nishamte mar. Abaye says to Rav Yosef, why didn't you excommunicate him, put him in Cherem? The Rav Shmuel Damrei Travayu menadin al shnei Yom Tov Shel Golios. For after all, Rav and Shmuel said that one does get excommunication if he is going to then transgress Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios. Omar le Rav Yosef says to Abaye, Hani mili, when is that so? Inish da alma. That's when a regular, an average person is transgressing Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios. But hocha tzurma midrabonenhu, the tavale avde. But here we're talking about young Talmudic students, and therefore these young Talmidei Chachamim, we give you the better of the two punishments. The ma'arova mimnu Anagato the bar beira v'lo mimnu ashamto, because in Eretz Yisrael they voted to give lashes, and they did not vote to give excommunication. So I gave the better of the two punishments to these young Talmudic students, the young Talmidei Chachamim, that came, in this case, from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. The Gemara now quotes the latter part of our Mishnah that states that similarly, during Shvis, during the Shemitah year, we know the din is that when the produce is now finished, has now depleted from the fields, whereby chayos cannot eat from that produce, that species, then even in one's home, he cannot feed the behemos and he cannot eat that species himself. So the Mishnah talks about a person who goes and takes his peiros on the seventh year, on the Shemitah year, and he brings them from a makom where they depleted that species, and he now brings that produce to a makom that did not deplete that species, or vice versa. He comes from a place where they did not deplete that species, and he brings that produce to a makom where they did deplete that species. The din of the Mishnah, according to the Tanakh, is you have to mevayer that produce. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, "Tzei v'havei l'cho af ato." So the Gemara wants to then explain what is this opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. V'lesle Rabbi Yehuda hodesnan. The Gemara understands Rabbi Yehuda's response in this latter case of where he goes and he takes his produce from a makom that they did not deplete to a place where they did deplete. Whereby Rabbi Yehuda is saying, well, go out and bring from that place, namely from the place where they did not deplete. Since you yourselves from this place can go to my original homeland and bring from that produce just as I have done, therefore it should not become something that you have to mavar and destroy. Ask the Gemara, if that's the understanding of Rabbi Yehuda, for lesle Rabbi Yehuda hodesnan, but he does not hold of what the Mishnah itself says. That we give the chomer, the stringency of both situations, and therefore, if you're coming to a place where they did deplete that species of produce, then you should not be able to then go ahead and use it. You have to mavar it. So Rabbi Yehuda does not hold of that. That's the Gemara's question. To which the Gemara answers, Amar of Shisha Bered Rav Idi, Milsa Achriti Kamar Rabbi Yehuda. You're right. Rabbi Yehuda was talking about a different matter. What is the situation that Rabbi Yehuda is talking about? As follows: Hachi Kamar, Oy mi makam shaloi kalu, the makam shaloi kalu. Or we're talking about a place. This is the scenario. He goes from a place where they did not deplete that species in the field, and he brought his produce to a place where they did not also deplete that species in the field. However, he heard that now they did deplete that species in the original place where he came from. Chayiv levar, the Tanakh would say, in such a situation we have to be machmir and mevayer that species. Rabbi Yehuda responds lahokel, and he says, "Tsei v'havei lecho af ato." He says, go out and bring, you also can bring that. Mehecha de asinhu, from the place of the new town. V'holokolulahu, and they did not become diminished. In other words, the people, the one who just came, can say to the people of his own hometown. He says, you can equally bring your fruit, your produce, you can get produce from this new town, just as I have. And since you can do that, where it's not kalu, it has not been diminished, and since in your place where I brought it, meaning my original place where I brought it, it did not kalu from the time that I brought it, therefore there should not be a problem. And therefore he's arguing on the Tanakh and says, you don't have to mevayer such produce. Ask the Gemara, Lememra Rabbi Yehuda lekula kamar. Are you going to say that Rabbi Yehuda is arguing on the Tanakh and he's saying a lenient opinion? We have a Masara that Rabbi Yehuda goes lechumra, and he argues on the Tanakh. So how can you tell me this lenient opinion? Answers the Gemara, Ela Epuch. You have to then switch around the opinions between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda as follows. Eino Chai Levar. The Tanakama is saying Eino Chai Levar. In such a scenario, you do not have to mevar that produce, that species. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer. On that, Rabbi Yehuda says, now he's saying that the hometown people can go ahead and say to this fellow, say v'havei lecho, go and bring yourself, afato, mehecha da'aisinu, from your place of origination, of your original place, v'hakolulu, and since that place is now kalu, that place is now diminished its species, therefore you have to mevayer. That's what Rabbi Yehuda is arguing, and he's going lechumra, keneged the Tanakama. Abai Omar, Abai comes and says, to explain Rabbi Yehuda, in a different scenario, going back to the original scenario, La'olam kidiktani. La'olam, really, it goes back like we originally taught, V'hochi kamar. In the latter part of the Mishnah, Oi, mi makam shaloi kalu, la makam shekalu. Or in a scenario where he comes from a place where they did not diminish that species of crop, and he now comes and brings that produce to a place where they did diminish that species of the crop. And he brings it back, right? This is, let's say, the diuk. He brings it back, that species, to his original place. And again, that original place did not go ahead and diminish that species. So vadayin loikolu eino chayv levar. The Tanakhama says, still, since the original place did not diminish its species, therefore you do not have to mevayer. Rabbi Yehuda oimer, Rabbi Yehuda is machmer and says, no, say v'havei lecho. Here, the people of his hometown, they are saying to him, go and bring yourself if you would like. Afato mehecha da'aisinu v'hakaluluhu, where it was brought, and from there it was kalu. In other words, from that place that you came from, it was kalu, and therefore you'd have to then destroy it. So here Rabbi Yehuda is being machmir. Matkif lo Ravashi. Ravashi asks on this last explanation of Abaye, le Rabbi Yehuda otu agaba de chamoro kaltinu. According to Rabbi Yehuda, are you going to say when the produce would be on the back of the chamor, it's absorbed? In other words, in this scenario, when he came originally from his place that was not kalu, where he brought that produce that did not diminish, and he brings it to a place where it did diminish, and now he goes back to the place, to his original place. So it's the original fruit, the original species, which never diminished in that original place. Are you going to say that that's something that he has to mevayer? That Rav Ashi says is not something that's sensible. That's not svaradik. Elom Rav Ashi. Therefore, Rav Ashi argues on Abaye and says you have to say the machlokes as follows. Beplukta dahani tanoi. It's a machlokes in the following machlokes tanoim in a Mishnah. It states in the Mishnah in Shviz as follows: Hakoivesh shloisha kevoshim bechavis echas. When you have three different types of vegetables that are simmering in vinegar in one chavis. Rabbi Elazar oimer oichlin al harishon. Rabbi Eliezer is most stringent, and he says that you're oichlin al harishon. When one of them becomes now diminished in the field, then you cannot go ahead and eat any of those species inside the chavis because they're all mixed together. They're all being marinated together in the same vinegar in that chavis, in that barrel. Rabbi Yehoshua oimer af ala achron. Rabbi Yehoshua says even on the acharon, meaning to say that he's coming to argue, and he's saying that even on the fact that the last one is diminished, meaning to say until the last one is diminished, you can still eat the other two as well. So therefore, if you have two of them that has not been diminished and one that has been diminished, or rather two that have been diminished and the third species is not diminished, So provided that the third species is not diminished, you can eat all of them in that barrel. So it's very mekel. Rabbi Gamliel oimer kosher kolo minoi. Rabbi Gamliel says that it goes by the individual species. The one that has been diminished, that you cannot eat. The one that has not been diminished in that barrel, you could eat. Min hasoda. So that's what goes to Rabbi Gamliel. Again, Rabbi Gamliel Omer, kol hashekol mino min hasoda. Depends on that specific that specific species in the field, if it's been diminished or not. If it has, again, been diminished, then you cannot eat it in that barrel. If it has not been diminished, then you could eat it. Yevar mino min hachavis. And the Gemara concludes, V'halachke devorov, and the halach is like Rabbi Gamliel. So what come out, what the Gemara is saying is that our Tanakama is like the Mekel opinion of Rabbi Yoshua. That means that so long as you have one species that has not been diminished in the field, you can eat all of the species in the barrel. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda follows the latter opinion of Rabbi Gamliel, that you go by each individual species, and therefore, if one of those species has been diminished, you cannot eat it in the barrel. The other one that has not been diminished, you could eat it in the barrel. And that's, again, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that's the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel, and that is the halacha.